Oh, hey, Harvester. Thanks for stopping by. I was actually just getting started on my spring garden. Yeah, I know. It's winter, it's cold, but it's never too early to start on a spring garden. If you want to come on in, I can show you the things that I'm planting and, some tips and tricks along the way. Before you do, make sure you're subscribed.
Before we get our hands dirty, let's talk supplies. You don't need a ton of fancy tools to get started with your seeds indoors, but there's a few essentials that will make the whole process a lot easier and a lot more fun. You'll want something to label your seedlings. I love using these little plant tags or a piece of blue tape. Track which seeds are in which tray, and trust me, when everything's starting to sprout, you'll want to know exactly what is what. Next up is a seedling tray. This is where the magic happens. It's basically a little starter home for your seeds. You plant each seed in its own little space, which ultimately helps keep things organized and gives them the perfect environment to grow strong without getting too crowded. Next, we need some sort of potting soil, but not just a regular potting soil. It's got to be a lighter, fluffier mix that allows the tiny roots to grow and breathe. Regular potting soil can be a bit too heavy, so go for a mix specifically designed for seedlings. Trust me, your seeds will thank you. Of course, you're going to need something to water with. A small watering can or even a spray bottle works great. You just don't want to drown your seeds, but you also don't want them to dry out, so keep it light, keep it moist. And lastly, besides our seeds, we're going to need a heating mat. Especially in a cooler climate, it's going to allow your soil temperatures to maintain a warm level and our seeds will germinate much more effectively. So Miracle Grow seedling mix is what I am going to be planting into. The mix is fantastic when it comes to starting seeds because it's specifically designed for young plants to give them the best possible start. Now there's other options out there, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use this today as everybody can get their hands on it. Once we get further into future videos, maybe I'll discuss some more in-depth ways to create your own seedling mix. But first off, it is super lightweight and fluffy, which helps with good airflow. That's a key to a good seedling mix, and the drainage of the roots. So really it's important to prevent waterlogging and root rot, especially when the plants are in their early stages of growth, and it may cause some issues. So if you're not super knowledgeable about all that, it's okay. Grab Miracle Grow or another basic seedling mix and it will help tremendously. I've made the mistake in the past of just using a standard mix, and believe me, it does not lead to a great harvest right off the bat. You want to start off on a strong note. Alright, so first up we have kale. Kale is great to start in January, so starting it indoors is a great way to get a head start on the growing season in the springtime. So again, filling up my seedling trays with a nice loose soil, and kale does love a well-drained fertile soil, so the mix is great to give them a chance to thrive. Once the tray is filled, just leveling it out to make sure that everything is giving a nice even coating to the seedling. Now I'm making small indentations in the soil about ½ inch deep. Since this is a seedling tray, I don't need to worry about spacing out the seeds. Just drop them in their holes and they'll grow together. I'm dropping a couple of seeds in each hole to make sure that we have a good germination rate. If both seeds sprout, or if there's 3 seeds in there, you can always thin them out later. Pick the strongest of the bunch, and at least you get some solid germination. Once the seeds are in though, I'm covering them with a light layer of soil, but not pressing too hard on it, just enough to cover them, keep them cozy while they're about to sprout. Now, gentle watering as soon as we get these planted. I will save that to the end and water all of our seeds today, but kale does like consistent moisture, so make sure the soil is damp and not soggy, and keep an eye on it and make sure to water it as needed. And to help these little guys grow, they need about 6 to 12 hours of sunlight a day at a minimum. I'm placing the seeds under a grow light, but if you don't have grow lights, totally fine. You can have a bright windowsill, put it in there for most of the day, and it should get some solid sunlight. In about 7 to 10 days, start seeing some kale sprouts. Once they're big enough, we'll transplant them into larger pots or just get them ready to plant outdoors once the weather warms up. So starting kale is super easy inside, and it's a great way to get a jump start on your season and have fresh greens when it comes to springtime. Now there are different varieties of kale, and you can keep kale growing for multiple seasons if you have the right conditions outside. I know they can be
a little bit susceptible to pests, which I had to deal with unfortunately this past year, and I barely could get any harvest myself just because they were consistently being eaten by our insects in the yard. But needless to say, I know there's plenty of gardeners that have had kale plants for multiple years and continue to grow and get new harvest at all times of year. Next up, we have lettuce. Lettuce is another cool weather crop and does great starting indoors in January. It's the perfect time to get it started. It's usually about 30 to 50 days where most lettuce plants you can get a good harvest from, and they will continue to grow throughout the spring season. And I'm just going to drop a few seeds into each hole just to ensure good germination. And again, it's a pretty easy crop to grow, and they sprout pretty quickly within those 7 to 10 days. It is important to keep the soil moist during germination, so I check regularly to make sure that they don't dry out. To help these little guys grow, again, we need about 6 to 12 hours of sunlight a day, and that's it. Just wait for those little lettuce seeds to sprout up, and in a few weeks they'll be big enough to transplant them or put them in another pot and put them into our garden. There are many different varieties of lettuce, and I will be planting 2 of them today, and it's great to have in your garden to go outside and just pick a couple leaves off, whether it's a heading lettuce or just a leaf lettuce. I prefer the leaf lettuce just because you can pick and go as you please. Alright, so now we have onion seeds. Onions are a fantastic addition to your garden. They do take a little patience, but the payoff is definitely worth it. Plus, there's so much you can do with fresh onions in the kitchen. I'm dropping a few seeds in each hole just to make sure that solid germination rate again, and they'll sprout within 10 to 14 days, so a little bit longer than our 2 previous plants, and then we'll thin them out later if we need to. Cover them with that light layer of soil and protect the seeds just to make sure they're not buried too deep, and gently water them in. These again need to stay damp but not waterlogged, and just check them regularly for sprouting. And yep, you guessed it, we need consistent sunlight for onions again, so that 6 to 12 hour mark, if not more, is great to get them going. Again, onions can take a long time to grow, depending on the variety, anywhere from 90 to 180 days. And really, they are low maintenance once they are in the garden. And just be mindful to be patient again, because if we put these outside too soon and they're too small, they will not be able to grow successfully in the garden. So they may take a little while longer in the seedling tray than some of our other plants, but once we get them out there, they are pretty self-sufficient. Just keeping them watered, and they do not have too many pests that go for them just because of their smell, similar to garlic. So let's get them in the ground, and then towards the end of the season, we're going to have plenty of onions.
Up next is broccoli.
Broccoli does take a little time to grow, but usually about 60 to 100 days from transplanting, depending on the variety that you have. But it's totally worth it. You can either harvest it for one big head, or you can go for some small side shoots, and it is great to have broccoli throughout the season if you go for those side shoots. But my recommendation is to plant a few broccoli plants, just because if you just wait for the final head of broccoli, you have a one use out of it. So succession planting throughout the season so you can have fresh broccoli is a great way to have that in your garden. Fresh homegrown broccoli does taste so much better than what you get in the store. Alright, so now we have cabbage, another brassica, which is another cool weather crop. Great to get started right now indoors. If you want to have fresh cabbage for your salads, make coleslaw, or even some sauerkraut out of it, it is great to have cabbage around. Cabbage seeds are a little larger than other vegetable seeds as it's part of the brassica family, so let's go about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep on this. I'm going to drop a few seeds in each hole just to make sure we have good sprouts. Once they germinate, thin out as needed. Once the seeds do sprout, usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks for them to be ready to transplant to your garden or into a larger pot. Cabbage is relatively long growing period, and once they are ready, you'll have strong, hardy plants and they're ready to thrive.
So if you notice, I am writing on these little blue pieces of tape. You can use a little marker or wood popsicle stick if you want, but just write down the name and the variety if you like on that, as well as the date that you're expecting your harvest. So on some of these, like the broccoli, I put 70 days. That's the expected amount of time when I could see my first harvest.
Chives. Chives are super easy herb to grow. They're perfect for starting this time of year. They add a lot of flavor to your dishes, so just think about the soups, salads, and even just a garnish that you want to put chives on top of a dish. So chives seeds are tiny. You don't need to plant them too deep, just enough to cover them up and keep them covered up with the soil. Chives do sprout fairly quickly, usually within that 7 to 14 day period. Once they are sprouted up, it does take about 8 weeks for them to be ready to transplant into the larger pots or into your garden. They're a fairly fast growing herb though, so you'll have fresh chives to use in no time. And chives are one of the few herbs that I'm going to start now. There are other herbs that we can start, but chives are one of my favorite. It's a simple, easy thing to grow, so we're going to throw this in here, and we're starting some other onion family crops, so why not throw chives in there? Did I mention onion family? Well, next up we have scallions or bunching onions. They're an awesome crop to grow. They're quick, easy, versatile in the kitchen, great for salads and stir fries for sure. Bunching onions do grow pretty fast. It usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks from the seed to transplant, and once they're big enough, you move them into the larger pots or into the garden. They don't need a ton of space, but make sure they are in an area with plenty of sunlight. And once your bunching onions are ready, you can harvest them and use them in all sorts of dishes. Alright, so now we're going back into another lettuce, our Bib lettuce. And like I mentioned before, I like growing lettuce, but when it comes to the warmer weather months, we do need to be careful when it comes to bolting. When it is hot outside, it does become prone to bolting, which essentially sends it to seed. And you can leave it there and let it reseed your garden, or you can pull it out and then hopefully have a succession plant ready to replace that other plant. So it likes the sunnier weather when it comes to the cool time, but when you are transplanting it out in the spring, just try and keep it in a little more shady area. It does still need plenty of sunlight, but something closer to the 6 to 8 hours a day as opposed to the 8 to 12 maybe a day. We don't want the sun beating down on it all day long, and once it is kind of developed, it will give you a good harvest even if it is hot outside. It just needs that shade to keep it a little bit cooler. Okay, last but not least, garbanzo beans. I haven't grown garbanzo beans before, so this is going to be a fun year for both you and me watching and seeing how we do with this. But garbanzo beans, we just want to plant one of these in each hole. I'm just going to do one to start off in this experiment that I'm going to have, and then we'll probably plant some more outdoors, or once some of these plants that we have in the seedling tray are able to be transplanted, I will replace it with some more garbanzo beans depending on how it does in here. But garbanzo beans love the sun, so putting it under that grow light, just like all of these. That's why I have this mix of all of these seeds, just because they all love the same things. They like well-draining soil, and they love the sun. So keeping a moist, draining soil is a way to have a successful harvest for all of these. They typically sprout within 7 to 10 days, and once they do, about 8 to 10 weeks, the seedlings will grow large enough to transplant outside, which is a little bit longer than the previous things that we've been dealing with, aside from onions, of course. But we'll move them into a larger pot or in the garden when we do get into the springtime after those couple of months of growing in this seedling tray. And once the beans are fully grown, you're able to harvest the pods when they're dry. Inside the pods, chickpeas. So freshly harvested chickpeas are great for making hummus, add to soups, and even roasting to have a crunchy snack.
Alright, so we are done planting our seeds, and it's just time to water them in. So we're going to take our spray bottle and just have a consistent spray across the entire board here. We want the water to soak in and slowly absorb into the soil. So not like pouring a heavy pitcher into it or even a watering can. We want to have a spray just so it's evenly distributed. And then after we spray a little bit, we're going to put some water in the bottom of our seedling tray, which I will show you in just a minute. But we need to really get this damp so we can have that germination process start, because without water, germination is not going to occur with the seeds. So keeping them moist is really important. And that's where a humidity dome really helps as well, keep that moisture in place and have the heat that each of the seeds are going to need in order to germinate. Alright, and that's it for today's video. Glad you stopped by. and I hope you learned a thing or two about starting seeds indoors in the middle of winter. Next step, let's check on these in another week or two and see if any of them have sprouted, and hopefully in the next month we can get some outside.